Hello, and welcome to A Dash of Salt with AJ. I'm your host, Ahsoka Jackson, blogger, podcaster, poet, and proofreader. Last time, we were talking about Reiner and the other Eldians of Marley, and how we're now being shown how they've been suffering and what their lives have been like. We already saw that some in Season 3, but now we're getting further insight into that, and we're hopefully starting to empathize with these people whom we've largely regarded as enemies for most of the series. Getting back to the topic, what side you're on in a war does matter to me, especially looking at the larger national and international aspect. But I also think it's true that both civilians and your average fighter on the ground basically get caught up in government actions a lot. And though there are plenty of war crimes and atrocities, I do feel like the average soldier is sincerely just trying to follow orders and participate in preservation of the country like they signed up to do. It's the leadership that screws them over, and they're left to suffer, as do regular citizens. And we saw that line of wounded soldiers suffering from PTSD, or shell shock as it used to be labeled. And then that one prick, a group of wounded, traumatized veterans, plus their Eldians, so already have to deal with more than enough mess like being used as suicide attackers and bullet sponges, and you're gonna harass them for a laugh like that. Being a veteran doesn't make you above reproach or even a remotely good person. I mean, that guy himself was a soldier, and we've seen how certain soldiers act. But what he did there to that group of men and the whole context there, I straight up told my friend that this dude needs to be the next person to die in the show, for crying out loud. I actually wonder if the jumper we saw later was connected to that, or just a random soldier suffering from trauma. I'm not even saying it would be fair to blame the jerk for that guy's suicide, even if he was from that group. I'm just curious if there is a connection. I think they would have made that clear, though, if that was the case, so probably not. But in a series that we know will be full of death, I'm gonna go ahead and volunteer him as tribute right now. Laugh at that, mother trucker. At least Falco was there to show some kindness. He might be kind of spacey, but he's also likable and forthright, and just feels like a pretty normal kid in some ways who's been thrust into the middle of this. You know, that moment where he told the veteran with the amputated leg, "You'll be okay eventually. It's over. You don't have to fight anymore," brought tears to my eyes the second time I watched it. That's one of the two main times that really got me in this episode upon rewatch. Speaking of Falco, though, I'm super curious to know what's going on in both his and Reiner's minds, because it seems like they both have stuff that they're planning or that they know, and that isn't really being revealed yet. And I guess it makes sense with his instability and all, but I was surprised when Falco asked whether or not he could trust Reiner, as I had figured they were already pretty close. Now, that big exchange between the two really caught me off guard. Reiner felt like a Vinland Saga character for a moment, like the art style and just how he was behaving. And I'm not sure if that's his craziness showing again, or if he was actually trying to protect the boy because he knows others might actually report Falco for supposed disloyalty if he let himself be overheard like that. Maybe it was a combo. And I feel like Reiner's also trying to drop hints for Gabi as well, though he can't just openly counter the false education she's been given. But man, they're really teasing us here narratively, especially with Reiner and Falco. I think it's not just that Reiner wants Falco to inherit the Armored Titan. I think it's also that he doesn't want Gabi to. That may sound a little obvious, but let me explain. What I mean is that this may be sort of like that comment he made back in the old seasons about how Eren was basically the worst possible person to possess the Titan powers that he did. He's the last person you'd want wielding those powers. Maybe it's the same with Gabi here. She seems to have bought into what Marley taught her, hook, line, and sinker, and she's going full steam ahead on this mission of hers to go wipe out the Eldians of Paradise. Meanwhile, Falco seems to have a less aggressive disposition, and even more important than that is the fact that he doesn't seem as convinced about the situation or dynamic that the Eldians and the warrior candidates are being placed in. So maybe Reiner feels that having Falco inherit the Titan would offer the best shot at having a good, or at least somewhat less horrendous, outcome, and that he's definitely a safer bet than Gabi, Little Miss Sunshine and sniper shots. Speaking of Gabi, there's that whole scene at the family dinner table. Some folks think Reiner was genuinely trying to paint the cadets from the 104th in a bad light, but I really think he was largely being sarcastic. What he pointed out were flaws, yes, but as other folks have pointed out, they weren't really anything monstrous. He painted them as a varied group of flawed human beings, not an indistinct mass of monsters. Gabi was expecting these horrific tales of brutality and evil, and he was like, oh yeah, they were true monsters. Let me tell you about this one time with the potato. This one girl stole it because of how tasty it looked. And then the cheeky brat tried to get one over on the instructor. And then another recruit was such a meathead that he could walk into a bathroom and forget why he was there. And I think the older members of his family picked up on what he was really doing especially well, although even Gabi picked up on it a little. Look, Reiner is a man who has seen and actually experienced a great deal of warfare and the actual horrors that come with it, plus with the time situation itself, and dealing with that dynamic of being preyed on and watching folks being eaten alive. And as someone else also noted, he's seen the violence and killing our recruits engaged in. He could have used that to show them in a bad light. Heck, even if their actions were justified, he could have simply twisted things to make them sound evil. What's more, he also fought directly against them and straight up has PTSD nightmares of Mikasa. But when tasked with describing the evil Eldians of Paradise, he leaves out any mention of bloodshed and instead singles out the potato story. Oh, the sheer depravity. And that line about how's hell being there? Some viewers thought that was part of throwing our characters under the bus. And actually, he does have legitimate reasons to call that overall situation hell, with the traumas already listed earlier, plus his unique experience of being a conflicted double agent who ended up mentally broken. But again, I think this is largely sarcasm on his part, or perhaps a change in meaning or topic here. As I was saying, the older members of his family have to get that the minor annoyances he listed wouldn't mean jack to him after the genuine horrors he's seen and been through, so they're not going to think he's seriously calling that stuff hellish to deal with. But his timing with that line was interesting. It comes right after mentioning his presence and that of his team for Marley. It could be that what he was really thinking and subtly expressing was that the situation was hell because he had to fight against people he had become fond of and had realized were not like Marley's lies about Paradise. Or maybe he means that the hell existed there because he and the others attacked Shiganshina and initiated that whole period of slaughter and terror. It became hell once they arrived, in other words. I really think his words probably have all three meanings, really. The sarcasm, the fact that it was hell having to betray his comrades, and the fact that the hell they all went through was largely initiated by himself on a small scale. I say on a small scale because there are much bigger situations at play in the overall situation of Marley, Paradise, and the Eldians. That started far before he was even conceived. It's just that he played a key part in that section of the conflict, breaching the walls of Paradise. If this whole idea of Reiner's approach here sounds a little roundabout, well, he has good reasons for that. I'll explain that in the next part of this discussion, and hopefully there will finally be enough time left to address the animation a bit. Although I think the next episode of the podcast itself will be me returning to the trailer sauce because I really want to get all of that finished and released, at least in audio form, before the next episode or two comes out. Really before the next episode of the show comes out. In the meantime, I hope you had fun today, and I can't wait to hear more comments, questions, and theories from my fellow Attack on Titan fans here. In the meantime, if you're enjoying the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe for updates and leave a like, share, or review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, social media, or whichever platform you use to listen. Be blessed and stay salty.